Get ready for your weekly dose of pixie dust with Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePaoli, and today on the show I have Rick Law joining me, who has worked with Disney for almost 25 years. Most notably, he's an illustrator who has created many of your favorite VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray covers from your childhood. So come hear stories about that and so much more that he's done with the Walt Disney Company in today's episode. Let's jump to that interview right now. Awesome. Rick, thanks so much for coming on the show. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Thanks for having me.
We met at Walt's Barn, which is an appropriate place for Disney fans to meet.
Yes.
And you introduced yourself? Yeah. Do you go there a lot?
I try and go out, when they're open and stuff. At least swing by for, an hour or two and say hi, see people and meet friends and fans and whoever's there.
And you introduced yourself and said you worked for Disney for 25 years, is it?
Yeah, it's been 25 years. August this year will be 25 years. So quite a journey.
Quite a journey, I can imagine. So what was the first thing you got hired? Because you're not a cast member, are you? You are an artist who gets hired for independently for projects?
Well, I have been a cast member before.
Okay.
Right now, I'm on a sabbatical. I'm kind of waiting for my next project, and I'm pursuing some other projects. But when I first started there, it was that way. I had already been working in Hollywood a bit, doing other kinds of projects for different studios and commercials and that kind of thing, and I worked for a lot of different music kind of things, Tower Records and Arista and Paramount and a whole bunch of different kinds of companies. And a friend of mine was art director at Disney and said, "Hey, we have some production work for you." So it wasn't anything glamorous, and it was at Home Entertainment, and it was kind of, at that point in time, they serviced 70 different countries around the world, and it was before the internet. And so for each of those countries, for every release that they did, they would put together these packages of different assets, of showing the art and that kind of thing to assemble a cover. So my job literally was to assemble all those assets in these packages that we'd kind of designed for each one, and assemble 70 different packages and send them out to DHL around the world.
Wow.
So, and the reason that they did that is because different countries have different requirements on what they can allow on their covers. Mm-hmm. So some countries, like the color blue, isn't fully acceptable.
Really? Okay.
So
funny, the things you never think of.
So they just culturally, there was, things. So it allowed them to have the different assets, the title treatment, different characters, and to adapt them for their culture or their region as appropriate. So that was kind of how I first started. And then one day, literally, I was there at the office, and someone had a birthday. And so they had a piece on their door. Everybody was signing like a card. And I went over and I kind of drew a Mickey head on the card and said, "Hey, happy birthday." And just didn't really thinking anything of it. And then my boss's boss came over to me, the head art director, and she said, "Who drew this?" And I was really nervous. I was like, oh no, because I thought, well, maybe like
it's sacrilege to draw
this is the
Mickey.
Icon, and you have to be official Disney artist to draw him or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, what did I do? And I said, well, I did it. And she said, "You draw?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "From now on, you work for me." And so from then on, I started actually doing covers.
Wow.
So that was,
and it was VHS covers at that point.
At that time, it was VHS covers.
Okay.
And then the first project that I worked on was the Black Cauldron.
The Black Cauldron, wow. Interesting first project.
Yes.
Wow.
So,
I want to go through a quick list here because you did covers for VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, and here's some of them. We got The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, The Lion King 2, Tinkerbell, The Black Cauldron, as you mentioned, Piglet's Big Movie, Winnie the Pooh, Springtime with Roo, 101 Dalmatians, Tarzan and Jane, Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas, Air Buddies, Snow Buddies, Space Buddies. It's crazy, and I'm really curious.
And many, many more.
And many more, I'm sure. I'm very curious what this process is, because to me it's interesting. I was recently having a conversation with David Kirshner, who produced Hocus Pocus, and he started doing illustrations for packaging for Sesame Street toys.
Yeah.
And this is very similar in the respect that I believe it's something people don't think about. Like, nobody thinks somebody had to sit down and draw this, right?
Yeah.
But obviously somebody did. It doesn't just exist. And it's kind of interesting that it's not an animator who worked on the film, which I think a lot of people would assume. So I'm very curious, what is the process when they come to you, they say, hey, you're going to be doing the cover art for the Black Cauldron?
Yeah, so and that's right on in that people think that typically they just think they ask me quite a bit is, don't they just pick up the movie poster and slap it on there? And there's different requirements because you want that image to pop on the shelf, and it's much smaller read on a store shelf than it is on a giant movie poster that you see in your local Cineplex. Mm-hmm. So there's different requirements and different things that they want and marketing wants. So they spend a lot of time, and I have to say, even though I worked on all of these, there's quite a big team of people that is involved. So it wasn't just like I was single-handedly there doing them.
So you were actually going to the studio to do this. This isn't something like you're independently working on at home.
I was a contractor at that time when I started doing these. Although once that my art director, she said, you're coming to work for me, I was in there every day like a regular job. And I would go in and I would just draw. And I was like, this is the coolest job I ever have in my entire life. So, the process is typically you sit down with the art director and they throw out a lot of different ideas, and then as time went on and they saw, I guess, my talent or how creative I was, they kind of let me come up with the ideas. And oftentimes, so I would sit down, I would say, well, what about this? What about this? I could do this and this and this. And then I would go back and do comps of those, and then bring them in, and then they show them marketing, and oftentimes marketing then would go through, and for whatever reason they would say, well, we kind of like this image from this one, but we like this from this one, so can you combine them, or can you take this out, or can you move this around, or just different things like that. So you end up doing a second comp or a third comp or fourth comp, or so it's several different rounds before they finally narrow it down, and then they say, all right, we want to, do this final. And then sometimes I would paint the whole thing. Sometimes that would go, they would take my comps and hand it off to another person, and then they would paint those. Sometimes it would go like in with the Buddies movies, and Air Bud, because those are live action. Mm-hmm. They would then hand them off to an art director who would take photo reference and literally go and just kind of clone kind of what I had drawn on top of my drawing in Photoshop and create that out of photos. And so much so that if you look at this Space Buddies, and it shows them all standing there on the surface of the planet, when I drew that, getting 5 dogs into that space, this narrow VHS cover, was very difficult. So I was like, how am I going to do this? And so I squished them, and thinking like, oh, he'll just fix it in the photo, when they put it together, the photo montage. Yeah. And literally they squished them too to fit it. So they did the same thing that I did in the drawing. And so when I saw that, I had to laugh. So, so it's quite a long process. And, at least, back when I was working on them, they start very early. So it would be sometimes a year or so before the DVD or the VHS is hitting the shelves. So oftentimes the film is still in production when those were starting in and working. So we would work kind of closely with the animators. That's how I got to know a lot of animators, and go back for brand reviews and those kind of things, and figure that out. I remember early on when I first started, we would send a lot of our artwork up to one of the artists, Dave Pacheco, who worked in Disney Classics collection up there doing the sculpts and things. And since he had come from feature animation previously, they would send it to him just to kind of make sure that things looked on model. And he would sometimes he'd go over my drawings or other people's. And I was very, I remember because, I asked the question to him and I was curious. And I said, Dave, how do you become an on-model artist for Disney? Because I thought it was like they give you a certificate or something, like somebody had to declare, okay, now you can draw on model. And that's not really the way it works. And I remember him looking kind of perplexed at my question. He didn't know how to answer it. He said, well, I've just kind of been here a long the time, and that's really kind of what it is you're just there long enough and you build your reputation and people say, wow, that guy can draw, and you can finally say, okay, you're drawing models. So,
or you draw Mickey Mouse on a birthday card.
That's how you start. Anyway,
that's how you start, and then eventually, well, that's crazy. So I'm going to assume step one is watch the movie. Yes.
Yeah. Although not always. When I worked on Simba's Pride 2, which was, I can never remember if Black Cauldron or Simba's Pride 2 was actually the first thing that I worked on. But it was one or the other. But like with Simba's Pride 2, I hadn't seen the movie, and they literally, I just keep saying literally, I apologize. They put me in a conference room and they just said, okay, start drawing. Based on what I knew of Lion King.
Wow.
And they kind of, they gave me a little bit of a brief in that they said, all right, well, this is a sequel, and it's going to have to do with the daughter and, whatever, and, go to town, draw. And so I was kind of coming up with stuff. And so that is maybe why that pose became kind of so iconic, because it really was kind of based on the first film of the big heads, didn't have a whole lot to go on. And it really kind of all fell together once we added the silhouettes at the bottom and stuff, because otherwise it was just two big heads in the sky on that cover initially, and it was like okay, I wasn't really feeling it, and so I said, well, I could try this, and it clicked.
So they really don't give you a ton to work with. I mean, it's
at that time,
it's very blue sky.
At that time, it could be very difficult at times. When I worked on Ichabod and Toad, there was very little reference. Screenshot. We watched the film, try and make screenshots or something of it, but there was very little reference of like the car, because the car isn't. There's, it's in the film, but it's kind of hard to get real clear shots of it. And so I had made the joke at that time. I said, well, I could probably go to like Disneyland and ride the ride and get some reference shots. And so my art director, she looked at me and she said, you know what? Okay, go down there and expense it to us. And so I was like, my head exploded, because I was like, okay, now I'm getting paid to go to Disneyland to ride the ride, to draw the cover. And I was like, I couldn't believe that. So
tell me,
it's my job.
In that research, what on the ride inspired you for the cover?
Well, primarily it was just trying to, and the final cover doesn't have anything to do with the car.
Okay.
There's nothing on there. But, I did a lot of different comps, some of them involving the car, some of them not at that time. But it was just trying to get clarity on how the car worked, the different angles of it, and what worked where. So it was kind of trying to figure that out and tie it more into, that history. So, and having the right reference. So, but, I did, with Ichabod and Toad, they had me do, I was trying to do a really good job. It was one of the earlier ones that I worked on. So, I did so many different comps, maybe 30 or 40 for that, there were some that I loved that they didn't pick for whatever reason. But, then those all go in a file cabinet. And then ever since, every release of Ichabod and Toad since I did it 20 some years ago, has been my art. They just pull it out of the file cabinet and paint it up, and there it goes. And
really?
So, yeah.
You don't see another check for that, do you?
No more. So
ownership of Disney at that point.
All done at that one point in time. So
wow.
So and then and even surprises still come out of that. They did a Halloween exclusive for Walmart with a piece of art that I had done, where when I did it 20 years ago, it was just the Headless Horseman. And the marketing said, oh, it's too scary. We can't do that. And 20 years later, Walmart said, hey, we're going to tie this into Halloween. We want that. And it became the slipcase exclusive cover. So,
wow.
So, yeah.
That's pretty crazy. I love that. Now, obviously, when animators are working on these feature films, there's one animator that designs a specific character. And now you're kind of inheriting these characters to put on your covers. Have you ever had a conversation with one of the creators of a character who maybe loved or didn't like, or any sort of conversation that was maybe slightly awkward? Like, oh, what did you do to my character?
No, nobody's ever said that to me. I mean, I'm friends with a lot of those animators, like working on Mulan, I worked on that cover, and Tom Bancroft and Tony Bancroft, who directed the film, are good friends of mine, the Bancroft brothers. And Tom, of course, did Mushu. And, but even I know sometimes there's nothing you can do because marketing decides you draw the comp one way and then they go back and Photoshop it after the fact and you'll come back and then see it. And Mushu's quite small on that cover and kind of, out of scale. But that wasn't the way that we originally drew it. It just is kind of after the fact, other art directors take it and they mess with it because marketing says, well, do this. And they want a bigger character read for certain characters and smaller for others. And it ends up throwing compositions off sometimes. But there's really kind of nothing that you can do at a certain point. You just kind of do your best on one and hand it off. And there it goes. So even like with Ichabod and Toad, the same thing as I designed that cover, that film strip actually made them look like they were walking down the path of a film strip. And it was almost like a sidewalk. For whatever reason, marketing decided they wanted to flip that film strip. So now when you see the cover, the final cover, it actually looks like they're walking off the side of it, like off a cliff.
Oh.
And so once you see it, you'll never not see it. It looks fine otherwise. It's just, for me in my head, I always know, well, I designed it one way and with a very specific purpose, and I would have changed whatever they wanted me to, but at a certain point, they take it out of your hands, and you have no more say or voice in that then. So it just goes away.
Yeah. Now, at one point, Disney was definitely, everybody, the entire industry was pumping out home video.
Yes.
And that slowed down considerably in the last decade or so.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, does this designing of covers, does that translate into like streaming and Netflix and stuff? Is it the same people working on that art, or is that more of a pull from the drawer type of situation?
It's similar. There is similar people working on it. I mean, at least with home entertainment, I know some of the same art directors that are still there that have, and they've scaled down quite a bit there at home entertainment. But they're still working, and they've just kind of transitioned to doing stuff for the digital streams and all the place. So they're creating art, but the art is, art doesn't have the same aspect ratios that it used to. It's much smaller.
It's a thumbnail now,
it's a thumbnail now. And so, and that happens even with CD covers. So I recently did one for a friend last year, and he never made a physical product. It was all digital. So seeing the art reduced and put online like that was, it's a different thing.
Yeah, it's really funny because like those VHS tapes I grew up with, they're like works of art now, to the point that you must have seen Disney made notebooks out of some of those.
I keep waiting to see if they're going to do one of mine as a notebook. So.
Yeah, so far they did Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, and Aladdin as notebook covers, and they're so retro cool. Like,
I think they should do Mulan.
They should absolutely do
Mulan. Then everybody will be, wanting that. So, and I know they've done a lot of Mulan product recently. So,
plus they got the live action film coming out, so you may get the Mulan. Those notebooks flew off the shelves. In the parks. They were crazy popular. I do have a question about something that has driven me nuts for a long time, and you may know the answer to this. And I'm curious, why do characters through the years sometimes change color? And I'm thinking about, like, if you watch The Little Mermaid, Ursula is gray, and now she has become more of a purple. There are purple tones in her in the movie, but she's become, like, purple now. Jiminy Cricket, very skin tone in the film, and is green now. When does that happen? Why does that happen? How does that happen?
So that specific evolution is more based in consumer products and licensing, because when you start translating these characters around the world, they're creating palettes for those licensees then to work off of, and sometimes those palettes are very detailed, and then they make more simplified palettes. And so they try to approximate, the film colors, but they try and find stuff that is translatable everywhere and stuff. And so when you go around the world, sometimes it starts shifting over time. And so, Jiminy Cricket, when you see him in the film, Pinocchio, he's very, at times it's almost flesh tone.
Yeah.
Pink.
Very much so.
And, now all of our consumer products, every product you see, he's green.
Yeah.
So, and that's just become a product of, okay, well, he's green. And there are some art directors and stuff at Disney still. Usually they're older and trained older, and they will fight you to the death that it should be a certain way.
Yeah.
It needs to go back to this. And they feel very, very strongly. I understand it. It's an evolution like everything. And how we come to grips with these. It's in being in brand management for many years there, it's, and character management, it's quite hard to keep keep these things constantly, the way that they should be and stuff. You always are finding slippage all over the place. You'll find licensees that try to put certain characters together that they shouldn't and create things that they shouldn't. And some of them are very funny, and there are a lot that I would want to share, but I can't because of this audience.
Yes.
But it's a fascinating job. So
now, I mentioned Jiminy Cricket and Ursula, but it seemed like, just by the look on your face, it seemed like you had thought of a million others.
Oh.
Are there some that drive you nuts, perhaps?
Well, I worked on a project for Japan over the last 4 years, my last big project, and a very large project that we were kind of renovating for them. And we were dealing with Mickey, and we're constantly having to get his skin tone correct.
Okay.
And it was shifting to where the licensees, it was a lot of different work. It was starting to look too pale, and sometimes he was coming out looking like a corpse. And so we were saying that would be great for the Haunted Mansion, but he needs a little bit more of a tan. And and it was, a back and forth thing. And it has to do with, too, is, for that, there was a lot of art being created. And so for that licensee, for them to go and do those things, it was a negotiation. What can we do? How can we do it within this timeline, within the production schedule, all of these kind of things. And so you try to say, okay, well, this is what we're aiming for. Try and keep this all along the way. And we just try and, maintain that line throughout. But, stuff changes and it shifts around and all the time. And you just
got to roll with it.
You got to roll with it. So
interesting. Yeah. So you've also been a toy designer for Disney.
Yeah.
For Mind Style? Are they, who's Mind Style?
So Mind Style is another Disney licensee out of China. And they did a lot of different kind of interpretive kind of toys, I guess, what we call Halo product, consumer products. So, and they've been at D23 previously. They did the Big Stitch, the interpretive Stitch campaign that was there, the Winnie the Pooh one in 2011, which I was involved with. And so they've worked with Disney for many years now. They're working with Funko, and a large part of that has kind of transitioned to Funko, what they do. So some of the products that I've helped create the company through over the years, and I've done a number of them. But there were one licensee I worked with, and I think primarily why people know that is because when Toy Story 3 came out, they did a big kind of campaign to celebrate that, and over in China and Hong Kong, throughout Asia. And so they created interpretive characters of the aliens, toys, and did a big art show on those. And I contributed probably about 40 to 50% of the interpretations there for that. And they created the smaller toys as well as the art pieces that went in the exhibit, and then toured them all around Asia. So, I've done toys with them. I've created stuff for the parks out of that particular thing, because we were working with the aliens. I created a design that became a t-shirt, which was then sold in the parks. So you might have seen it's the green t-shirt and has the alien face on it.
Yeah.
So it was cleaned up a little bit from my initial design, and they put it out, and it's been a big seller for them there. I don't know if they still sell it, but the last time I was there, they still had it in the parks. But yeah, I've created many products for the company over the years. But toys being one of them, as well as I've done a little bit of toys, even my own stuff outside that kind of, my own tweaks on the mouse.
Tweaks on Disney, yeah.
Yes, so.
I like it. Very cool. So you've done the video covers, you've done toy design, also involved with Disney publishing worldwide?
Well, yeah, I started at the company working with the home entertainment in 1993. And then, so I did that up until 2008. I want to say right about 2008 is when I stopped working with them, because my original art director I worked with at Home Entertainment started working on a new project, initially just as a logo design for Disney Publishing, creating a logo for a new business called Disney English. Mm-hmm. And so we started working on that to kind of build the kit for the logo application for that. And so he ended up getting hired as the art director, the global creative director for Disney English, my good friend Bradley Gross. And so then I was hired as the first person under him on his team to come in and for us to actually build Disney English, which was this brand new business that nobody had. It was this experiment in Disney kind of creating educational content for the China market and building schools in China to teach Disney, basically. To teach
English.
Well, to teach English as a second language using the Disney stories and properties.
Interesting.
So
kind of goes back to the days, didn't Walt had like training videos during wartime?
Yeah.
So it kind of ties back to old Disney history, which is kind of cool.
Disney education has a long road with a lot of bodies on that road along the way of things that have worked and not worked throughout the years. And this was kind of the newest thing that they were going to do. And so they asked us to come in and kind of build this. And there was no blueprint. Mm-hmm. So we kind of set out with an educational team that we pulled together of teachers and our creative team to kind of create this program. And really it was about teaching English as English as a second language. It was a big business across Asia, and Disney wanted to get a piece of that, and they said, well, we think we can do it better. So they brought us in, and it probably was a little bit more of an Imagineering challenge, or should have been.
Okay.
But we were incubated under publishing, and so we were asked to do that. So, for Bradley and I, and even the rest of our team, we all came from a print background. And this, in some ways, turned into more of an Imagineering background because we were creating everything from the print curriculum to the uniforms for the teachers and the staff to the actual facilities, designing the murals and how the look of the school and the signage and all of that. So the Disney English program was kind of, we created that. And so within 9 months of we started, it's actually 10 years. We're celebrating 10 years of Disney English this year. So April of 2008, we started, initially designing. And then in October of 2008, we opened in Shanghai, in Maoming Road. And Shanghai was our first prototype school that opened there. Huh. And it's been going for 10 years, and literally thousands of kids have gone through it now. And I think the last I heard, at one point in 2011, I think it was 11 schools, but I think they may be up to like 20 now. Could be wrong on that, but it's been very, very successful, and a lot of learnings. That was a very unique project at the time because give you a little bit of history. So in 1938, Snow White was first shown in China. And shown in some Mickey Mouse cartoons, shorts and things. But then the revolution happened and People's Republic of China was formed in 1949. So Mickey and all Western influence was kind of banned for a good 40 years. And so Mickey kind of wasn't seen then until 1986. When the Disney company made a deal to put him and some of the old shorts with Donald Duck onto China television. So, and it was initially just shown to the Politburo in China. Mickey was represented there, and then they kind of gave the green light for it to go on. So from 86, then, they had started talking about very early trying to. Disney always wanted to have a larger kind of presence in China, but what ended up happening is we made a movie that offended the Chinese government. It was called Cauldron, and the Chinese were not happy about that, and so it cut off a lot of access for a lot of things there, and Disney had to go back. Michael Eisner actually had to go and make an apology, and so in '98, he basically said we were wrong to make this film, and to proceed the way we did on it. With that formal apology, it kind of started.
What year was that?
That was '98.
So that
Michael Eisner.
Was that before or after Mulan?
That was I want to say before.
I don't know the year of Mulan. Shame on me.
So that started laying some groundwork. So then, even then they were interested in trying to do potentially like a Shanghai Disneyland.
Okay.
And when that, as far as I understand it, when that apology was made, the Chinese government indicated, well, we already have kind of a space set aside for that we're looking at. But even then, from '98 until 2009, nothing really happened.
Yeah.
So it was only.
So wait a second. Are you saying Shanghai Disneyland kind of goes back to Eisner?
There's some roots there, yeah.
Interesting.
So some
All
very,
right.
very roots there. And at that initial, when Eisner apologized to the Chinese government, that was when he introduced the Chinese government to Bob Iger and said he will be leading the way on Shanghai Disneyland.
Interesting.
So then nothing else really happened between '98 and 2009 except Disney English.
Wow.
So Disney English opened in 2008. And it was the immediate success of Disney English and the government seeing that and seeing how the people responded to it that then triggered the approval for Shanghai Disneyland. In 2009, they finally got the approval. And then in 2011, they did the groundbreaking, which led to then the opening of Shanghai Disneyland in 2016.
That's insane.
So
That is a crazy story.
So yeah, so
what we're saying is you are single-handedly responsible for Shanghai Disneyland.
no, not at all. I don't take all that credit. That's Bob Iger. There was a lot of negotiations along the way, of course, and but it's been a massive project that goes way, way back, and
So interesting.
and will continue to pay dividends for not just for the country of China, but for the Disney company for years and years to come. And so and then based on our involvement with Disney English and some of the craziness that happened in challenges that we faced in building that program there. Because there was nothing really happening like that in not only for the Disney company in China, but that anybody had ever succeeded really that way. I ended up going and being asked to, with the rest of our creative team, to consult on Shanghai Disneyland.
Wow.
So, and to convey our learnings with Larry Davis and his team over there. So
did you actually go over there for that? Or?
Well, I went over when we initially opened the schools in China in 2008, but we consulted here. And so the interesting thing, we make the joke is with both Disney English and Shanghai Disneyland, it's one of the few products that was, built here in America and exported to China, as opposed to being created in China and exported to America. So, but there's, a number of challenges with Disney English in that, when we were building the flashcards and our curriculum, we discovered China has completely different maps than the U.S. and the rest of the world, because there are certain things that they claim as their own and certain boundaries and demarcations that they say this is China.
Huh.
One being, of course, the disputed Tibet, Taiwan. So, those things on their maps are People's Republic of China, as opposed to our maps, which, call them out clearly different ways. So,
wow.
So that was kind of one of the little things. Another thing was, for us in just building the school facilities themselves or designing them, we would get blueprints that would come from China, and we would get them. They were all in Chinese and metric.
Yeah.
So, we were from a print background, and American, very American, so we only knew, of course, inches, and feet. So we were constantly having to not just translate the measurements, but, even trying to read the translation of the Chinese blueprints. So quite a number of different things that we faced there, both with that progress as well as with Shanghai Disneyland.
Now, have you had a chance to go visit Shanghai Disneyland?
Not.
No, I haven't.
So, and then when it came to Shanghai Disneyland, the Imagineers faced some of those same things, is that none of them were steeped or versed in China initially. So, and as Bob says, we want to make it authentically Disney but distinctly Chinese is kind of the buzzword for that. And so, our kind of the consultation was sitting down with them, showing them kind of what we had learned throughout time, and sharing that with them so that they could then create based around that. So, one of the things that we learned early on with Disney English was, so initially went in there and we have what we call a magic whiteboard that we show videos on, and they can utilize kind of like a giant computer screen or chalkboard. And the kids would come in there and we would say, like, have Mowgli up there, and it would have a lesson, and he's swinging, and you could do different fun games with him or whatever. And we realized that the kids weren't really engaging with it in the same way. And we didn't really understand why initially until we figured out they don't know who Mowgli is.
Yeah. Certain characters,
for them it was just a Jungle Boy. So, and where they had, like I said, Mickey had come in and Donald as these shorts in '86. It was more seen as a corporate icon. Mickey was known as an icon of Western civilization. They didn't really know the stories behind him.
Yeah.
So we quickly figured out we have to kind of tell the stories of Disney first. That wasn't our initial, there was a lot of controversy afterwards Disney's trying to come in and brainwash kids with their stories. And that really wasn't the thinking going in. We thought, well, we can show them Disney, but we don't necessarily have to tell them the story, teach them. And we figured out we kind of have to because it doesn't connect otherwise.
Did you find that there were any characters that they did specifically? In fact, I feel like I heard China is really into Snow White. Is that true?
Well, they, like I said, Snow White goes back to 38, so there was a reference point there for them, even though most of it had kind of gone out at that point in time, especially in the younger generation. They didn't have any real connection to it. So all of those things we kind of went in and taught. So when we met with the Imagineers, we kind of told them that same thing and said, this is an opportunity for you guys to introduce with the Disneyland, in that, everybody comes back to Disneyland because the storytelling is very layered. Every time you go back, you can discover something new. And I said, utilize that, fall upon that, go back to that, and draw out that storytelling. So they had designed a beautiful Main Street, which was not anything like the Main Street that we know, but it was more international in nature, and it would go throughout all of our Disney properties and change geography based on as you went down the street, the different architecture would go with different geography. It was very beautiful, but when we went and laid out kind of our learnings, they said they took that upon themselves to change it and become kind of the meeting place for Mickey. And so now it's Mickey Avenue when you come in there. And, it was learning about those characters and their backstories and, kind of your entry point to the Disney and the Disney pantheon more than anything else. And so, and I was very surprised because, in our consultation, because I had, laid out kind of what we had thought and here's our thinking and stuff, to them see them go and then, re-engineer and design the entire street based on that was kind of stunning. So, to say the least. So
crazy.
So yeah. So
I can't believe it. That's like quite the story of Shanghai Disneyland I've never actually heard. So that's fantastic.
I don't know if it's been told before, and I've
a Disney Coast to Coast exclusive. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean,
there we go.
Yeah, pretty much.
Let's just say it. I want to talk about a film that you were an associate producer on called Drew, the Man Behind the Poster.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot of these properties that are involved here are now Disney properties because this is the artist Drew Struzan, is it pronounced? Is Star Wars posters. These are these classic 80s posters that everybody's seen, very hand-drawn. He did a lot of Star Wars posters. He actually did the poster for DuckTales, the movie, the Legend of the Last Lamp, or what is it, Legend of the Last Lamp or Treasure of the Last Lamp? One of those two. The DuckTales movie.
Yeah.
And Beauty and the Beast soundtrack he designed. The Back to the Future. I know it's not Disney, but it's a classic one. Indiana Jones movie posters. And the Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye attraction poster. Yeah. You must know the story behind this with Harrison Ford.
And he called Harrison.
Please tell. I love this story.
Well, initially when Drew did that poster, that when Disney asked him to do it and he came in and he met with Tony Baxter, they didn't have the rights to Harrison Ford's likeness.
Which is why the audio animatronics do not look like Harrison Ford.
Yes. And so Disney didn't have it, and Drew said, well, and he'd even done a comp. If you get the Posters of Disneyland book, the comp is in there and you see his face is all darkened out in the pencil comp. And so he went in and met with the Imagineers to show them that and talk with Tony Baxter. And Drew said, well, why are you doing this? And they said, well, we don't have the rights to do it. And he said, well, why don't we just call him? And then Tony, he'll tell his story. He says, they were kind of blown away by even the idea. And they're like, well, if you can do it, sure, great.
Right.
So Drew said, okay, well, hold on. So he picked up the phone and they called Harrison right there. And Harrison said, if you're doing it, then yes, you can have my permission.
That's incredible.
So Drew's the man, and so Harrison let him do it, and that's why Harrison appears on the poster and nowhere else in the ride.
Yeah. How did this documentary come about, and how did you get involved? Was it your idea, or?
It actually wasn't my idea. I had known Drew since I first moved to LA. And now it's over 25 years easily. I literally cold called him when I came to LA. I was looking for a book that he had done an exhibit of his advertising art. His work was kind of included in that. It was a book that's really hard to find out called Dreams for Sale. And I was trying to search for a copy of this book. And so I called the ad agency that had put on the exhibit, and Tony Seininger, and called up Tony and got him on the phone and said, yeah, I'm looking for a copy of this book. He's like, well, we don't have any more copies of here because that was done a few years back. He said, but I know a guy who might. So here's his number. Call him and see. And he didn't tell me who I was calling. And so I called him up, and it was Drew.
Wow.
And so then Drew said, yeah, I think I have a few copies left. Why don't you come on over? And I freaked out. And so...
So at that point, you knew who you were dealing with.
Yes, I did. And so I got my buddy, my roommate at the time, and I said, I'm going to go see Drew Struzan. I said, do you want to come with me? And we jumped in the car and raced. At that time, I was living out in Santa Clarita, and raced all the way over to Pasadena. And, I'm sorry, he had his at the time, Sierra Madre, he had his studio at. And we went there, and I was so excited. He spent about an hour with us at the time, talking with us and getting to know us. And, I was this young artist and, starting out, and I was kind of blown away. And so then it comes time at the end of the day, or the end of the visit, to get the book, and he signed it for me and everything. And I was going to pay him, and I reached for my checkbook. And this is back when we had checkbooks. And I realized I had been so excited and in such a rush, I'd forgotten my checkbook. And I was simply mortified. And Drew said, don't worry about it, just send it to me. And I was so kind of impressed by that, but it's simply mortified, that I raced home and got the check and then ran it all the way back out to him. It's a good 30, 40 minutes each way.
Yeah.
And I think he was surprised when I showed back up with the money. But at the same time, Drew had been burnt by a lot of different people in his career and his life. So I think that kind of instilled something in me, like, oh, okay, this is the guy I can trust, kind of thing. And we became friends. And I have been ever so blessed to have his friendship. Just one of the people in my life that I've been friends with. And then through that, so to fast forward then, in want to say like 2011, maybe, because we did the film. Took about 4 years to make. Maybe it was 2010. I'd heard that there were some people interested in doing a documentary on him, and so then I ended up meeting them, and they asked me to come involved. I knew Drew and stuff, and so I did, and they asked me to come on as associate producer, and I was happy to. And Drew didn't know for a long time that I was involved, and I told them point blank, I don't want him to know, so don't tell him.
Yeah.
And we'll just make it. And,
why didn't you want him to know?
Because I didn't. Most of the films that I've been involved with, and most of the things that I try and do, the projects that I try and undertake now, I do because they're my friends, and I see it as a way of paying back in a way, because people have been so gracious to me through the years, and literally I was a dumb kid, and they just kind of took me under their wing or just became my friend. And so I've been fortunate enough to have that, and so, but I also haven't wanted to highlight that or take advantage of that. And so so I was like, he'll find out soon enough, but I was like, that's kind of my agreement with you guys, is I didn't want him to know initially. I said, let's just do it and bless Drew and make it happen. So we did, and it came out in 2013, and been very pleased by how that's elevated him in the public's eye, and been able to see that go around the world. And
now, where can you see it now?
Currently, I actually don't even know.
Okay.
Maybe Netflix.
I was going to say Netflix
Hulu.
needs to pick this up, or one of the streaming.
I believe it was on Netflix for a while.
Okay.
It may not, because it's a limited window that they give you. It may not be on there anymore, but you can still order it on like Amazon, and
Okay.
I'm sure even stream it off of one of those services online.
Very cool. Yeah, I got to check that out, because I mean, in the 80s especially,
Yeah.
holy
Drew was the
moly,
man.
those posters were everywhere.
Yeah.
And I literally have one hanging up. I Back to the Future Part 2 hanging in my living room right now, and it's great. And he came back for Star Wars episode, what was it? Episode 8?
Seven.
7?
Yeah.
So, is he doing a lot now?
Well, he's kind of retired now, and he keeps saying he's retired. Every now and again, I've tried to look at my friends and the way that they lead their lives and base kind of the way I go around that same way, following their footsteps, I guess. So as Drew says, he does stuff for his friends.
Yeah.
And so people come to him and they say, "Hey, Drew, will you do this?" And if it's J.J. Abrams or if it's Guillermo del Toro, his friends, he'll like, "Okay, cool, let's do stuff." If it's somebody else, not necessarily.
Not very interested,
when we did Floyd Norman's movie,
he did the cover of that.
We did the cover of Floyd's movie, and so,
yeah, that's crazy, because I met Floyd at Walt's barn, and he gave me his business card, and it's Drew's artwork, and he was very proud of that. He was like very specific to point out, "This is Drew," and I was like, "That's incredible!" Like,
so
that's wonderful.
So, and that's another film that I'm proud of and proud to be involved with. It's when I started Disney English at Disney Publishing, Floyd was there. And even though I'd known Floyd, I'd only known him from afar. And here now I was working, just down the hall from him. And so, one day I saw him, Floyd was having lunch by himself. So I said, "Hey, Floyd, do you want to have lunch together?" And so he said, "Sure." And I was actually surprised that he was having lunch by himself. But that started 8 years of pretty much having lunch with him every day.
Wow.
And hearing all these stories of Floyd's. And so, at a certain point after we finished doing Drew's movie, the director on that film, our director was, I kept pushing him and saying, "What are you going to do? What's your next project?" And he said, "I don't really know. I don't know." And we were at Comic-Con promoting Drew's film, and Drew was doing a signing, and I told Floyd, "Well, come on over and meet Drew." And he had met Drew previously, but I said, "I'll introduce you again." And so at the time, I took the opportunity, taking the opportunity to plant a seed.
Yeah.
And, pulled our director over and said, "Hey, have you met Floyd Norman?" And then I said, "Let me introduce you," and kind of told him a bit about Floyd and our background and our friendship. And then, within a week he had called me and he said, hey, I kind of have an inkling to want to do a movie about Floyd. And I said, I'm in. So then we started down the path of doing Floyd's film. And as Floyd says, or as Floyd blames me, he says, they started it all. So, and then that, that has become what it's become, and it's elevated Floyd as well. And so, I'm pleased to see that. So, because even though Floyd, when I knew him and I met him, he'd already had his Disney Legends Award. I don't know if he was necessarily appreciated in the same way by the larger fan community. Yeah. So it's really kind of helped, give him visibility, a lot of visibility. So
that's cool.
So
I love that documentary. I've got to check out the Drew one. I have not seen that, and I have to get my hands on that. You did just get back from Comic-Con. I'm curious if you did any of the Disney panels. Did you do the Mickey panel or the Nightmare Before Christmas or anything Marvel you want to talk about?
I didn't get to the panels. It was for this year was, it was my 32nd year going. I've been going since 1986.
Wow.
And it's how I got to know a lot of those older guys initially, being 16 when I was there initially. It's when I first got to meet Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and those guys. And, they were all there. And Comic-Con was a very different thing back then. 6,800 people was the limit. Now I think it's passing 130,000 people. So it's always a blur going to Comic-Con, and I am still kind of a little bit recovering from it. And so I didn't get a chance to go to as many panels this year as I would have liked to. I was only there in that 48 hours that I was down there, 2 days this time. I was awake for 40 of them.
Okay.
And walked 10 miles. So, which is actually a lower amount than I typically walk. So, it kind of destroyed me. I was fortunate to go. This is the third year I was able to attend the D23 member mixer.
Okay, cool.
Which celebrated the 25th anniversary of Night Before Christmas.
That's cool.
And the D23 team always does a great, events.
Yeah.
And a lot of fans there. And they had Jack and Sally and
cool.
Oogie Boogie out there. So at the event. So we had a grand time there. So it was a lot of fun. And I'm back now, like I said, is a little bit, catching back up. So,
So as we wind things down here, I'm curious. As you mentioned, you've been at Disney or worked for Disney throughout the years for about 25 years now. What's the biggest change you've seen from 25 years ago to today?
Just the nature of how the company has become more of a corporation.
Okay.
When I started, there was still some semblance of it being a family company still.
This was 93?
Yeah, 93. So Roy E. was still there, the nephew of Walt. And
now, was animation back on the lot at that point, or were they still in Glendale?
When I first came, they were still in Glendale.
Okay.
So, and then they built the new building and moved into the new building eventually, the Hat Building, as we call it. But Roy was there, and and I had kind of already known a lot of those even before I started working full time there. I'd gotten to know a few people primarily through Comic-Con. I had met Gary Charles. I believe we were trying to figure it out actually. I believe that's where I first met him. And Gary was off of Beauty and the Beast and invited me to come to the studio. He was the first one that ever invited me to come to the studio. And I came in and hung out with him all day there at the studio. And went to my first screening. It was a Roger Rabbit short. And that was still in Glendale there and on Flower Street. And then, but there was still a family kind of atmosphere to where if you didn't know something, you could pick up the phone book. That's still when we had phone books at the company. Mm-hmm. You could pick up the phone book and look up somebody, or you could ask somebody, and they would know somebody in the company, and they could call them and say, "Oh, ask," and you could get it figured out. Yeah. And now the corporation has grown to a point where it's very compartmentalized, and it's hard to know where to even go sometimes to get the resources that you need to sometimes do your job. And it's only institutional knowledge kind of from some people that still kind of know that stuff. Yeah. But, and the different divisions don't, because it has grown so large, don't necessarily that collaboration becomes harder sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing. I continue to tell people, because a lot of fans will look at that and they say, "Oh, it's bad," or they'll look at even the changes at Disneyland and they say it's bad. And I've never held that opinion. I look at it, I know fans want to kind of preserve all of that in amber. They want it to stay the way Walt had it, or the way they remember as kids.
I think Disneyland especially.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just say every generation has a different memory of the way that Disneyland was for them as kids.
Yeah.
And Walt never wanted Disneyland to stay the same. He was an advocate of change and moving on and stuff. It's just harder as, longtime fans, you watch that happen and you say, "Oh, that's like, you don't want that to happen." But that's kind of been the biggest change. When I first came there, the 9 old men weren't working there anymore, although they still were around, and 4 of them anyways. Yeah. And they would come and consult and things. So I was fortunate to know Ollie and Frank and Mark and Ward even a little bit.
Wow.
And those guys, as well as some of the other older guys who were there, you could, if you had your portfolio, you had a question, you could pretty much just kind of walk in their office and ask them, and they would sit down with you and give you tips and all that, and talk with you, or you could say, "Hey, let's go to lunch," or those kind of things. And it was those kind of connections that kind of made Disney family. And unfortunately, that just because of the nature of it being so big and people doing their jobs, it's not really as conducive to that anymore. Yeah. So, and part of that change is, I tell this story sometimes, which is kind of an exemplar, I guess, of that. So I was there working in I had gotten a Disneyland Honorary Citizen certificate, which I'd bought off eBay. Okay. Or I purchased off eBay for myself. It was one from the 80s, and it had all the characters facing towards the castle. It was blank. And I thought, okay, as a unique memento, I'm going to have this made for myself. I'm going to get my name calligraphied on it and my birth date, and I'm going to have a couple extra signature lines put on it. And, my idea was I want to get Michael Eisner to sign this, Cynthia Harris, who was the president of Disneyland at the time, and Roy Disney, I was thinking, because those were the biggies at the company at the time, executives, and I want to have them do this. So I set out to do this, and I went to the calligrapher at the mayor's office, and she was very sweet to do it for me for free. And then we eventually ended up, I introduced her to some people at Home Entertainment. We had her do some work for us. We did a project on Princess Diaries, and so she calligraphed some things.
Oh, that's cool.
But so she calligraphed up this certificate, and I've told this story on my Twitter before. And I've shown the certificate on there, and I sent it off. And I thought, well, first I'll reach out to Cynthia Harris, and send it off. And it came back eventually, and it said, I'm not able to sign this. I'm sorry, and stuff. So she just declined to sign it. So then I thought, okay, well, I'll try and go and get Michael Eisner to sign it. So, and I had a good relationship with his assistants. They knew me and stuff, and from my work at the company already for many years there, and or a number of them. And so I sent it off to Michael's office, and it created a weird awkwardness, because all of a sudden I got a call from legal.
Oh no.
And legal wanted to know where I obtained this, and were very stringent about it. And I was like, and how did I get this? And only Mickey Mouse has his signature on here, which I knew. I said, okay, yeah, Mickey Mouse is printed on there, but as I tried to explain to them, it grants no rights. Man. You don't use this anymore at the parks. Yeah. It's been phased out. I bought it off eBay as a collectible, but it was a very corporate response.
I can't stand hearing stories like that. That drives me crazy.
And, the assistants were very kind in that they said, well, what we can do is we can get you a signed copy of Michael's book for you, which I'd already had. Yeah. But they sent me along another one.
You already had a signed copy?
Yes.
Give me one of them, please.
So they sent the certificate back to me, and I was concerned even when I was going to get it back. So at that point, I was pretty dismayed that I was never going to get this done. Yeah. And so I was like, all right, do I even want to try sending it over to Roy?
I was going to say, I feel like Roy would have been the easiest.
So I said, okay, well, and I had known Roy. I mean, I had been acquainted with him. I'd run into him at Taco Bell, in line at Taco Bell. Like, as Floyd and I always say, he's the nicest billionaire you'd ever want to meet.
Yeah.
And most down-to-earth one. So I'd seen him in passing and things. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to try it. And, fearful that the lawyers would somehow get wind of this again and stuff. But so I sent it over to him. And I got back this note from Roy, and it said, Rick, happy to sign your certificate.
Of course.
And of course he did.
Of course.
And it made it. And so I always use that as an example of family versus corporate.
Yeah.
And that was the difference was, and I think it may have helped a little bit because at that particular point in time, unbeknownst to me, Roy and Eisner were kind of butting heads a little bit.
Yeah.
But that was the big, that's the biggest change that I've seen over time.
That's crazy.
There. And,
now, before we get on to trivia, I have one final question because I know you were not involved in this, but if I have somebody on the show who was involved with VHS covers for Disney,
yes.
I need to ask about The Little Mermaid and what the heck happened with The Little Mermaid. For those listeners who don't know, Little Mermaid's a bit infamous. The movie was 89. I don't know if the VHS was 89 or 90, but the release of the VHS most certainly has a phallic symbol on its cover. As a person who has been in that world, what happened?
Okay, so, well, if you look at the film itself, the screenshots, even the reference of the castle in the film is a bit suggestive. It's very strange shapes there going on. So as far... I do know the artist that did that poster. I have to say and clarify, it's not me. I don't know if I should go on record as saying who it is.
You probably shouldn't.
But he, I tease him about it.
He knew what he was doing.
I don't believe that he did. He used the reference that he had and he painted it, and he claims he didn't. He swears to this day he didn't do it on purpose. He did it. It ends up looking like that, very much so. But it was not an intentional thing.
All right.
But yes, it did cause major waves. The funniest story I have about him in particular is we did a children's event at a hospital where we were drawing for kids. And one of the kids came up and they wanted me to draw Little Mermaid. And I turned to her and I said, well, I know who does a really good Little Mermaid. And I sent her over to him to do it. And he just, chuckled.
Minus the castle.
Yes. So that's kind of the story.
So he really suggests he didn't do it on purpose.
His story, and still to this day and within our community of artists that we know, is he did not do it on purpose. So, and I think that he's in a place now that if he had,
he would have said
he probably would have said at this point in time. He's not really connected with the company anymore. He's off doing other things.
Interesting.
And other things that actually poke fun at stuff. So I don't think that, I think that he would declare it. So
interesting.
You might be able to find out if you look online enough, but I just don't know if I feel comfortable.
I should get him on the show.
So
you think he'd do the show?
He might. So
I should try and get him on the show.
Yeah.
Anyways, guys, I think that means it's trivia time. Rick, do you want to hit me with a question first, or shall I hit you?
All right. So we were talking about the videos and the DVDs.
Yes.
So, I struggled over trying to figure out one. So the only one I could really figure out was, do you know what year the Masterpiece collection started out?
Oh, God, there's so many collections. There's Special Edition, there's Diamond, there's Signature, there's Master, there's Classic. Master, I want to say 1994.
Wow.
Is
good.
that it?
Yeah, it is it. It's 1994.
Boom.
So I started in 93, and I worked from Masterpiece up through the gold and platinum editions.
Okay.
So those are the titles. Most of those in there, I worked in some way or another.
Very
with
cool.
or on. So
cool.
Our team.
I can't believe I got that number right. That was a total guess.
Yeah, 94. And okay, here's a bonus question then for you.
Okay.
So do you know what year DVDs were first put out?
Ooh, you know what? I was working in Blockbuster Video. I don't know about Disney specifically, but I worked at Blockbuster Video when I was in high school. And that was like 98 or so. And we transitioned to DVD in that time. I'm going to say 99.
Wow, good. Yeah, it was 99.
Boom.
99, we first started doing the limited edition DVDs. There was only I think it was like 8 of them that we started out. Mulan was one of them. And so that was the first one. So
I just remember being working at Blockbuster. You know how there used to be the drama section, the comedy section, and, animation and whatever. And then DVDs came out and there was just the DVD section. Yeah. It was so small that anything DVD just went in the DVD section.
Well, okay. I'm sorry for keep throwing out questions
That's
here.
Okay.
So when I was, VHSs started in the 80s actually, but very limited edition again. And they were in just select retailers. So like Magnavox would have them, and they would have a collection of them and stuff. And so it was about 84, 85, I want to say. And they put out Robin Hood on VHS.
Okay.
And they put out a special poster that folded out. And it had this cool painting on it. And when I first came to home entertainment, there was a painting in my cube, and I was like pulled the sheet off of it to look and see what it was, and it was that painting that I had the poster of in high school over my bed, and it was that Robin Hood poster.
That's so cool.
And so I had that in my cubicle for many years, that hand painted poster.
Oh.
But but those VHSs in 84, 85, do you know how much they were?
Oh, how much they cost?
Yes.
$120.
No, not that much. $89.
$89. Okay.
$89.
I think the rental stores paid $120 for them.
Yeah.
I think that's what I might be thinking. But yeah, they were crazy expensive.
Yes. I still can't believe that. $89 for a VHS.
That's crazy. Going way, way back, what was the first Disney animated feature canon to be released on video cassette for rental only? This is back before it was home video. It was rental video only. What was the first Disney?
That's those limited edition ones in, in the 80s.
This is 1981.
Yeah. I don't.
Take a guess. First Disney animated film that they released for rental on VHS.
Well, I know we didn't do Snow White for years. Fantasia.
There's a live action version coming out.
Really?
Yeah.
Was it Winnie the Pooh?
Nope.
No.
One more guess. No?
No.
It's Dumbo.
Oh.
Dumbo was the first June 28th of 1981.
Yeah.
They released it for rental only. I believe the first one you could purchase for home video purchase was Pinocchio.
Yeah.
And that was like mid-80s.
Yeah. Well, see, this is, when you start talking about the home entertainment stuff, for me, it goes, that's a good 20 years ago. So it's going quite a ways back, and it starts taxing my brain. So even before I was coming over here, I was on Twitter telling people, I said, yeah, I'm writing down stuff, trying to remember this stuff, because it's quite a ways back, and so much more stuff has happened in more recent.
What's your Twitter handle so that people can follow you?
So my Twitter handle is Observant View. So, and that's also my Instagram. So, Observant View, if people want to follow me there.
There you go. Make sure you go follow him. Rick, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling these stories.
Thank you.
These are great. And before we get going, folks, I do want to remind you that every single day on our Instagram live account, we play the Daily Disney Decision. You should come join us live on Instagram and become part of that. It's a fun game that you can play every single day. And of course, leave those 5-star ratings and reviews on iTunes to help other folks find the show more easily. All of our social media can be found over at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. And I want to give a shout out to my patrons, Philip, Rio, Monet, Susanna, Anna, Diego, and James, who support the show on Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. It's because of folks like you that I get to keep creating new episodes, so thank you very much. If you'd like to become a Patreon supporter of Disney Coast to Coast, make sure you go to patreon.com/DCTC or simply head to DisneyCoastToCoast.com and click on Patreon there. Other than that, have a magical day, folks. Bye!
Thanks for watching Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePaoli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com.